The first actions of Chief Lagunas Indicitus were related to the postponed construction of the Senate chambers, making excuses to spend the money elsewhere. Namely, to build a temple for his family cult. This was his filial piety on full display, in the most literal sense possible. Lagunas later brought Malleus Isherbeldus, a major senatorial contributor, to trial due to his supposed disloyalty, but truly to ensure that he would not seek to get his money back from the tribe. He was convicted due to a weak alibi, and even the support of the Creedy clan could not help him in this matter. He was imprisoned and lived out the rest of his days in prison. This brought Lagunas a certain level of popularity, now seen as a man of action against other well-established landowning elites. Meanwhile, to the southeast, Crete had continued its Middle Eastern expansion, taking Sinai from Egypt, as well as the Nile Delta itself. This was a blow that Egypt would never recover from, driven into decline from then on. The Hellenization of the Nile Delta was now set in stone. The Nile was a Greek river. In 93 BC, Lagunas publicly called upon Melkart to bless the region's trade, and to distract from his fervent devotion to his honored ancestor. In 92 BC, Punicus Caridus demanded the state give him additional men and arms for his personal retinue, and Lagunas responded by telling him the chief does not deal in demands. Punicus, from this point on, was rather disloyal to the tribe, cagey that the chief was seeking to kill the vanguard of the Republic, the Caridi family. As a result of his open defiance of the chief, Punicus was brought to trial for abuse of office. He was found guilty and imprisoned alongside Malleus. These trials, being rather expensive, led to Lagunas taking more money from certain members of the government, often by force. Rebellion began to brew in the southwestern part of Avarignia, on the border with Carthage, among those who were both Celts and pro-Republic, hoping that such an arrangement would afford them greater representation in Avarignia by way of their own wealthy landowners gaining franchise in state affairs. A riot near that region was put down in 89 BC with particular brutality, increasing the chief's reputation for tyranny even among his supporters. Lagunas was overtaken by an intense and smothering depression in 88 BC, souring his heart and impacting his performance in office. In July, Rome conquered Bastarnia, a large realm on the coast of the Oceanus Sarmaticus in Germania. In September, Lagunas called upon the god Candamius to bring morale to his armies in the wars he was certain were to come, though many attributed this to his prevailing melancholy giving way to feelings of doom. Though his fears were vindicated in November, as Lusitania Septentrionalis and Abacosia seceded from Avarignia in the Fourth Celtic Rebellion, this time seeking to establish independent Celtic republics. This would be a war fought largely by the Eastern Allies as Avarignia floundered in its many debts. The rebellion was overcome in 86 BC, and the leading families of the revolt executed. On top of the fatigue of war, the harvest failed in September, and as a result, certain populations were forced to migrate, in direct contradiction of tribal laws, which sought to encourage a stationary and centralized agricultural lifestyle. Lagunas dispatched his personal retinues to the countryside in order to cut down those who sought to circumvent the dictates of the chief. In November, marble began to be exported to Rome, and the council forced Lagunas to set these profits aside for the construction of the Senate chambers, taking advantage of his depressive state. Meanwhile, a band of fugitives wanted by Carthage crossed into Avarignia on the 16th of November, and Lagunas welcomed them, relishing the opportunity to be a thorn in the side of Carthage, whom he saw as the greatest enemy of Avarignia. To the north, Perugia had united most of the Celtic tribes in northern Britannia, and was looking like a major power there, aligning themselves against Dobunia. They had even begun to send out merchant ships to Avarignia, which did not receive these Celts kindly. In 84 BC, Phrygia erupted into civil war, a squabble between brothers over a powerful throne. In 83 BC, Lagunas called upon Melkart once again, with genuine intent this time, in the hopes that he would rebuild the Avarignian economy. In 82 BC, Lagunas contracted diphtheria. In September, Lagunas emerged from his depression and enacted what he called the Logistics Council. This council was a cadre of merchants and local craftsmen which were allowed to operate on local trade policy of their own accord, which soon earned Avarignia another trade route into the capital. The 73-year-old Lagunas fathered a child in 81 BC, a daughter who he named Canine. In the east, Parthia took advantage of the Phrygian unrest, conquering a fair amount of northern Persia in the process. In November, Ilergetia called upon Avarignia to join its defensive war against Tectosagia, and Lagunas accepted this call to arms. The enemy called Niciobrogia and Auschkia into its war against Ilergetia, complicating the matter further. In 78 BC, Carthage invaded Ilergetia as well, who, for whatever reason, be it pride or shame, did not call upon Avarignia for aid. Hearing the news of the invasion, the tyrant Lagunas Indecitus died of a heart attack at the age of 76. Another son of his was born soon after his death, named Sosian. The council was greatly afeared of appointing another charismatic enemy to the seat of chief, so chose a demonstrable ally in the form of Nakarada. She wasted no time, and set to work towards the founding of the Republic, which Lagunas had managed to stop almost entirely. The 65-year-old chiefess was a member of the most powerful family in Avarignia, the staunchly Republican Caridi, and many were confident that if anyone could deliver the Republic, it would be her. In September, Aife Nesunda was brought to trial for abuse of office, when really it was to extract 200 gold pieces from her overfull treasury, accumulated via cooperation with Lagunas and his regime. She was soon found guilty. After the trial, Stena called upon Melkart, and when trade improved that month, the treasury was blessed with a surplus. Telscubilus Isherbellus was brought to trial for attempting to undermine Stena, and when brought to the court, he tried to flee, knocking over Stena. As a result, he was removed from his command of soldiers and imprisoned. It later came out that he was a Similchi cultist known as a Similchian. In 76 BC, Stena enacted a campaign of border reinforcement across Avarignia and sued for a separate white peace in Ilergetia's war, leaving it entirely. Ilergetia lost a quarter of its territory soon thereafter, costing her some popularity with the people. In the east, by 74 BC, the situation became even more violent, with Atropatene overcoming much of Parthia, nearly conquering it in a civil war. In 73 BC, wishing to avoid war with Carthage, Stena turned back a mob of refugees, which were fleeing the war between Carthage and the Persian remnant which was forced to flee west. This improved their opinion of Avarignia to a high degree, but caused her name to be damned amongst her own people. Stena called upon Melkart once more in 72 BC, and in January rumors reached Avarignia of the Dahe, a group within Scythia, which had taken control of a local kingdom and sought to capitalize on the Phrygian chaos to their south. In 70 BC, Circus Aquarius and Lusitania Septentrionalis seceded in the Fifth Celtic Rebellion. Initially, this rebellion was no different than the last, and the Eastern allies did most of the work putting down the rebels. However, by 66 BC, it became clear that Ilergetia was not coming to help, and that more must be done by Avarignia this time around. In February, Stena contracted gout. The Fifth Celtic Rebellion was put down in 65 BC, and just like last time, the leading families of the rebellion were put to death. In May, the Phrygian revolt ended, but then Rome fell into civil war, a result of futile attempts to quell the unrest of the Germanic tribes it ruled over. Though, by 63 BC, Rome emerged from the civil war even stronger than before, having strengthened its position in Germania. Arvernia in Gaul and Thrace in Dacia each grew and benefited from Rome's temporary absence in the diplomatic theater, making certain healthy territorial acquisitions. In October of 63 BC, Stena died upon eating rotten herring at the age of 80, being succeeded by Secunin Isabella, taking the position at the age of 68. She was tolerant and merciful, and while an admirably kind spirit, Many began to wonder whether that kindness was the sort of thing Avarignia needed at the helm in this time of uncertainty. In November, she contracted gout. In 62 BC, she brought Uxtenio Indicitus and Cara Nisunas to trial for conspiring against Avarignia, though it was truly an attempt to dispel myths about her fortitude. They were found guilty after a swift trial and executed. In February, Sikunin began a campaign of temple construction across Avarignia, dedicating them to the many native Iberic gods in order to counter the growing popularity of the Similchian cult. In August, after neglect of a gold mine in the province of Asturia Meridionalis collapsed, killing several slaves, Sikunin Isabella decided to seize the property of the slave owners and compensate other slaves for the loss of friends and family, which was a distinctly controversial decision. In 61 BC, she called upon Melkart once again to bless the trade routes. Sikunin died of food poisoning in 60 BC, and Caro Caritas was chosen to succeed her as chief. Umarillo Ishbeldi attempted to kill him on behalf of the monarchist faction of the Indiciti clan, though he failed. His trial was foregone and was executed on the order of Caro, who announced his death with a terse statement. The people demand it. Nothing else is needed.